So I've said to you many times that when you're reading from the wisdom traditions, such as Hannah and Teresa Burke have read for us right now, or through the scriptures, or through mythology, that there are many, many ways of unpacking the message. The first one is literal, and then the second one is symbolic, and then you've got metaphysical, esoteric, and mystical. So there are many, many ways of engaging with a text. So for the reading that I'm going to do this morning, I've chosen from the Gnostic Gospel of Philip. And I've just taken 3 passages, verse 29, verse 79, and verse 80. And the first one is just an accurate, historical, literal, verse. You can take it exactly as it stands. The next 2, however, are deeply esoteric and metaphysical and mystical. So you have to think much more deeply about those. Verse 29. 3 women would always walk with the Lord: Mary, his mother, Mary, his sister, and Mary Magdalene, who was called his companion. Mary is the name of his mother, his sister, and his companion. Verse 79. Some people mistakenly say that we must die before being resurrected. If they are not resurrected while they are still alive, they will not gain anything by dying. And maybe the most metaphysical of the 3 right now, verse 80. The Apostle Philip said, "The carpenter Joseph planted a tree farm, for he needed wood for his work. The cross was made by him from the trees he himself had planted, and his own seed died from what he had planted. His seed was Jesus, and what he planted was the cross. But in the middle of that tree farm stands the tree of life, an olive tree from which the chrism oil comes, and from the chrism oil comes resurrection." These are words inspired by God. Between 1973 and 1979, I was working among the Kipsigis people in East Africa, Kenya, in a little mission called Kipchimchim, literally the place of the water springs. And it was about 5 miles from a town called Kericho, which was the center of the tea growing district of Kenya. And about 40 miles to the west is the biggest lake in Africa. It used to be called in colonial days Lake Victoria. Now it's now called Lake Kisumu. And every day, almost like clockwork, between 2 o'clock in the afternoon and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, there would be very, very heavy rainfall and tremendous lightning showers. And sometimes these lightning events were fatal. I remember one Sunday, on Sundays typically, I'd say Mass early in the morning in Kipchimchim, and then load up. I had a Datsun pickup, and maybe 20 people would climb onto the back of it with me, and we'd head off to one of the outstations, and then say Mass in the outstation, which was another 2 or 3 hours. And then we go on to a second outstation and say Mass there, and then come back in the evening around 6 o'clock-ish. And I remember one particular Sunday, we come back to the village in the evening around 6 o'clock to find out that one of the men who was on the back of the pickup, that his house had been struck by lightning, and his wife and his 5 kids were dead. And I had a personal encounter with lightning myself a little bit later. Sometime in 1979, I had a phone system. We had a very big mission. We had the mission house itself. We had a convent of African sisters, the Asumbi sisters, who ran a maternity hospital on the compound. And we had a primary school, we had a secondary school, and we had a hostel for physically disabled children, mainly children who suffered from polio, who stayed during the school term and then went home during the holidays. And so I had a phone in the mission. And the phone was in my office, and the wire came in from outside, and it ran down the wall, and the wire is stapled to the wall about every 6 inches. And then it leads down to this big, big box with a battery in it. And I'm sitting there one day, writing with my right hand, and I got my left elbow sitting on top of the phone, really, really stupidly. And lightning struck the line right outside the house. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard lightning. I'm not talking about hearing thunder. Lightning is if you took a crate of glass and just hit it with a kind of a bomb. It go real crashing sound. So I hear this crashing sound, and all of a sudden the entire wire gets ripped off the wall. The staples are flying across the room like a machine gun. Pop, 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 pop. The box explodes, And I'm fired across the room, landed in the corner. I have no idea how long I was out. It could have been a few seconds, could have been a few minutes, I have no idea. I came to, and my entire left arm, from the shoulder to the elbow, is glowing blue. The entirety is like an aura around the whole thing, and it's kind of lifeless. And it took about an hour to wear off, and I retained full ability of it afterwards. But it was interesting. There's something about being struck by lightning that changes your psyche, not just physiologically, but even kind of psychologically as well. And so beginning around that period of time, I started having some really interesting kind of visionary experiences, which was the beginning of my own kind of personal cosmology. And many of those I recorded. I read them as readings and Sunday masses, and I included them in a few of the books. And so I want to pick up on that today in a bit. Last week I spoke about the motherhood of God, about Christa consciousness. Today I want to pick up on that theme and develop it further. And then so today and next Sunday I'll expand on that theme. May 22nd is the community mass. And then May 29th, I'll do a recap, of the theme and open up to a Q&A. So to begin where I left off last Sunday, I talked about the notion of, I called it a global near-death experience. And I'm fascinated by the whole notion of the near-death experiences. So the reports are that a near-death experience typically begins with some kind of extraordinary radical darkness that the person experiences. But it's not a fearful darkness. It's rather a wondrous. It's like the fertile womb out of which light is going to be born. And so this tunnel opens up. It's like a birth canal. And then some kind of a really deeply loving light appears at the other end and gets larger and larger and brighter. But it doesn't blind somebody. It's like being bathed in liquid love. That's what they talk about. And then some kind of a voice begins to speak to them. I call it the logos. You've got love, light, and now you've got logos. And the logos is inviting you into a kind of a further exploration of the other side of the veil. And when you go across that veil, you encounter a much, much higher form of life. And so now you got the four of the 5 L's. You got the love, you got the light, you got the logos, and you got a life. And now it leads to laughter, the realization that everything you thought was real and important, you realize it's at the smallest level of reality. And ultimately, you're going to reach a barrier which you're not allowed to cross, because you're being told you have work still to do. You've got to go back and finish the task for which you volunteered. And so there's some kind of a life review. And the life review is not about judging you or saying, you didn't do good. It's about saying, okay, here's how you've lived your life to date. You went down on a mission. Here's what the mission was, you remember? And here's how you performed. Do you want to go back down now with a renewed sense of mission so that you can align even more closely with what you've come down to do? Now, that seems to be the individual journey of those who've been pronounced clinically dead and have had near-death experiences. I believe that we're going through, I'm going to call it a global near-death experience right now on our planet, with all of the same stages and all of the same possibilities. There is the darkness of our times, very definitely. But there is a light in the darkness, and there's a logos in the darkness. There's a voice which is calling us to embrace and to create a much higher level of life. But there's a barrier. And the barrier is the opportunity for us to do a life review as a species so that we can come back, and have a much greater sense of what our mission was, and ever come back and complete the mission. And I believe that this has happened many, many times. The human species hasn't just encountered a single global near-death experiences. I believe, it's been cyclical until we get it right. So I keep saying to you that the very first word in the scriptures, in the Hebrew Bible, is the word Breshit. And Breshit is always mistranslated as in the beginning. It does not mean in the beginning. If they meant in the beginning, it would be Bareshit, but it's not, it's Breshit. So it is in a beginning. There have been many beginnings. We've had many attempts. We've got close to where we are right now. And obviously we failed. Now is the opportunity. Are we going to get it right this time? And in many, many different traditions, the mission of Atlantis, Lemuria, the great writings, the Popol Vuh of the Mayan civilization, which show that humanity has been in this place many, many, many times. So that's pretty much what I said last Sunday. So I want to build on that today. One of the most fascinating experiences for me once I came to the States in 1987, and I began my studies at the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology, was having the privilege of meeting people who were practitioners of other great, wisdom traditions. Now, I had read about them. I had read about Judaism, Buddhism, Islam, Hinduism, Taoism. I'd read about all these things. But for the first time ever, I'm meeting practitioners, people who've been raised in these systems. And so I came across the notion in Hinduism of the multi-tiered body, that we don't just inhabit a physiological spacesuit. Rather, there's a physical aspect to who we are. There's an etheric aspect, which is the energy template of which the physical body is simply hard copy or a printout. There's the astral level, higher still, which is the place in which we experience emotions, a level that allows us to dream and to travel astrally. And it's the place in which we download all of the experiences of a single incarnation so that we can pick it up on the way back down on the next incarnation. And then the fourth level is the mental body. It's like Plato's ideal realm, the place from which we get insights and download all great kind of aha experiences. And then there's the psychic level of the body where we experience our own innate psychic abilities, clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, precognition, psychokinesis, telepathy, all of these pieces. And then above that is the soul self, and ultimately is the source self. So I was fascinated by that model, the Hindu model of body. And it led to many, many kind of visionary experiences since 1987, that addressed this evolutionary trajectory. And I began to see that this was true not just of the individual human person, this kind of multi-tiered body. I began to see that it was true of the planet itself, of Gaia. And so I created a model of 7-tier model of the evolution of Gaia. And the first level is, I call it this Physio-sphere. It's the rock, the third rock from the sun. And it's what's studied by physics, and inorganic chemistry. And it led to a vision I had in which I saw a great soul, whom I call Gaia, volunteering for incarnation to animate that third rock from the sun. And she set out, and her project was to create life forms on this planet until it evolved to a stage where a species would emerge that would recognize its own inner divinity, and ipso facto, the divinity of all other life forms. So in some senses, it was the soul self, I call her Gaia, volunteering to become a role self that I'm going to call Pachamama. So Gaia, in some senses, is a more etheric level of the planet, and Pachamama is the physical articulation of the planet. So that would be the first stage that I see. The second stage, then, I'm going to call it the Atmosphere, and it's studied obviously by climatology, and it was the creation of the womb of life. As Gaia set about, creating a species capable of experiencing its own divinity, the first thing she had to do was fashion a womb capable of giving life. And this for me would be the etheric body of Gaia, the second level. The third level then would be, I'm going to call it the biosphere, which is studied obviously by biology. And it was the emergence of plants and animals and humans. And for me, this is the equivalent of the astral body of Gaia, the level at which she dreams, the level at which she has out-of-body experiences, the level at which she's kind of archiving the wisdom of all that has emerged before, the plants, the animals, and the humans themselves. The fourth stage, I believe, is, I'm going to borrow a phrase from a word from Teilhard de Chardin and call it the Noosphere. And that's the realm studied by psychology. It's a kind of a new global brain. It's a kind of a worldwide web. And this movement from the biosphere to the noosphere is where we are right now. And it's a very, very dangerous place to be. And that was the kind of second vision I had about that process. It was a vision I had of the cosmos being pregnant. And I'm looking at a silhouette of the cosmos. I'm seeing this big belly. And I'm looking into the belly of the cosmos, and I see planet Earth. But instead of there being a single umbilical cord tying the baby to the mother, I could see at that stage, this was many, many years ago, the population was about 6.5 billion at that stage. I could see 6.5 different umbilical cords attaching the planet to the cosmos. And at some stages, I could see that the mother herself was really sometimes vibrant and alive, and sometimes she was wan and listless. And it seemed to correspond to the kind of the texture of the liquid that was flowing through the umbilical cords. When it was murky and grayish, she was really listless. When it was bright and sparkling, she was alive. And I was told, the voiceover said to me, each of the umbilical cords is the words and the thoughts and the actions of every single human being on the planet. And you're either poisoning your mother, or you're helping your mother who is attempting to help you. Now, one of the functions of an umbilical cord is to discharge or eliminate toxins from the baby through the mother, which is why in early stage pregnancy, women will experience, morning sickness. They're exuding the toxins from inside. But if the mother gets overpowered by that process, she can't feed the baby anymore, and then the baby is going to have difficulties inside. So that was the kind of the second great vision, that's saying in this transition point between the biosphere and the noosphere, it is a very, very dangerous part of the journey. Because, at this stage, you can go right or you can go wrong. Up to now, nature herself had been kind of programming the evolutionary trajectory. But now there are beings with willpower and self-determination who can determine where it's going to go into the future. Because there are many more stages to come. The fifth stage I call the Anima-sphere, the sphere of the soul itself. It's studied by theology, and that's the soul level of Gaia. Beyond that is what I would call the Pneuma-sphere, the spirit sphere, and it's a place that only mysticism can reach. And then ultimately, I call the seventh one Brahma-sphere, union with source itself. Now, we're only halfway through that trajectory. We're now in the movement through the Noosphere, hopefully toward the Anima-sphere. And that's where I had a third very important vision. And it happened down at the creek in 2012, November 2012. And I read it for you some weeks ago. And it was an experience, an interdimensional experience, maybe thanks to the lightning, I have no idea. And I go down to the creek, and there's somebody sitting on the creek, which was very unusual. I've only seen a person down there maybe 5 or 6 times in 28 years I've lived up here. And he's sitting on the creek with his legs dangling into it, and he's chewing on a blade of grass. So I sit down beside him, and I pluck a blade of grass, and I start chewing it myself. And I'm thinking, in my mind, I didn't say anything, I wonder if he wants to tell me a story. And he turned to me and says, yes, I do. Here's the story. And he told me this extraordinary story. He told me that he was a being from another dimension, and that their function was to seed life throughout the cosmos. And they would visit different planetary systems, and they'd seed life. They would come back, they'd water it, they'd fertilize it, they'd weed it, they'd genetically modify it. And the idea was that they would create a life form that would evolve in various stages. And he said, I've supervised these projects, more times than I can even remember. And each time we do it, it's a very simple process going from the seeds to the plants to the animals until it reaches a stage where an animal evolves that has free will, has the ability to make choices and therefore intervene in the further trajectory of its evolution. And he said, up to that stage, I can always predict very accurately where the planet is going to go, what kind of life forms are going to develop. When it gets to that stage, I can never predict the outcome, because I've seen places where it's worked and they've broken through into Christ consciousness or Christa consciousness. But a lot of the time they break down. They break down through human hubris, and warfare and greed. And he said, I'm watching your planet right now, and I'm wondering which way you guys are going to go. Are you going to break through or break down? So that was the kind of the vision of the I call it the gardeners. And it led to my notion that we're at a trifurcation point in human history, not just a bifurcation point, but a trifurcation point. That there's a group emerging whom I call Homo sociopathicus, the greedy warmongers who want to take control of the resources and set us at each other's throats. And then the second group I call Homo artificialis. These are the cyborgs, the artificial intelligence, the transhumanist movement that's attempting to make, cyborgs of some human beings to serve Homo sociopathicus. They will be hackable and programmable, so they no longer actually have free will. They're dictated as to who they're going to serve and how they're going to serve them. And the third one is I call Homo spiritualis, people who are waking up to this realization and are confronting that and will not allow it to happen, or at least create some kind of an enclave of people who are dedicated to waking up and staying awake. So that was kind of the model that emerged over a series of visionary experiences about Gaia, or planet Earth itself. Just in this last week, as I was thinking about today's homily, I had this vision that this is true not just of the individual human being, this 7-level kind of evolution. It's not just true of Gaia, the planet itself. It's also true of our cosmos, that the cosmos itself goes through the same kind of process. And so, we have our universe, the one that science attempts to understand, but in fact, there's a one beyond that. Beyond the cosmos is cosmos with a K. In the Greek, cosmos with a K does not mean this physical universe in which we find ourselves. It means the metaphysical original from which this physical universe emerged. So that would be a second level of it. And then to follow the trajectory, there is our particular cosmos, whether you spell it with a C or a K, is simply one in a bubble bath of universes. So that'll be the next level up, the astral level up. And this bubble bath of universes is simply a single showroom of bubble baths that go way beyond the single bubble bath showroom. And then there's the kind of the franchise of the showrooms of the bubble baths, of which our particular cosmos is a single bubble. And it keeps going ad infinitum. And so there are holographic fractals. So it's an infinite progression or an infinite regression, with what you're trying to go upwards or downwards. So in order to understand, so we don't get caught in the infinite regression and reduce this cosmos of ours just to to quarks and subatomic particles and mountains, we need to break out of our space, our fascination with space, time, energy, and matter. All of modern science is predicated on these 4 pieces: space, time, energy, and matter. And as long as we're stuck in that model, we're never going to go much further. We have to break out of that and go trans-spatial. We have to go trans-temporal. We have to go trans-personal, and we have to go trans-rational. And trans-rational does not mean irrational. It means beyond incorporating, but going beyond reason. So I had this vision just yesterday, and I didn't know whether it was the whack of the head I got from the windmill that I was assembling or not. I suddenly got the notion that the cosmos itself is a playground created by God to educate, to entertain, and to evolve his children. And like any playground, it contains all kinds of theme parks, including some very scary rides. But we volunteered for these scary rides. So these theme parks contain all kinds of life forms, all the way from just rocks to human beings, to extraterrestrials, to extra-dimensionals, to angels themselves. And it seemed to me as I watched this happen that God's children, try on all of these costumes in the course of the hero's journey. That you've been in many, many different costumes, not just on planet Earth, but in other arenas as well. But with the assurance from Mother God that you are an immortal being. You were never born, and you will never die. Incarnations will have a beginning and an end. There'll be times when you put on a costume, and there'll be times when you shuffle off this mortal coil. But you are not the mortal coil. You are not the spacesuit. And so Mother God assures us, if you choose to play in these gardens which I've created for you, you will never die. But you'll take off costumes at various stages. And some of the rides are going to be really, really scary. And we volunteer anyway. Which brings me then to the notion of when you volunteer, what's the process? And I call it the game of devolution and evolution. It's like a wheel spinning, devolution and evolution. If you put a mark on your bicycle on the front wheel, a little tag on the front wheel, it's going to be at the top of the wheel at one stage and at the bottom of the wheel as you pedal, and then it'll come back to the top and go back to the bottom. It cycles again and again and again. So that's the devolutionary and evolutionary aspect of these theme parks that God creates for us. And so from the top, it looks like this. When the marker is at the top of your wheel, you're at source self. And then it goes to the soul and the psychic level and the mental level and the astral level and the etheric level. And the lowest point is the physical level. And that's the great hero's journey that our great friend Ingrid speaks so eloquently about very, very often. The hero's journey is the willingness to leave the safety of home and enter the dark forest. And for me, that's the real meaning of the phrase when Jesus says, I assure you, there is more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 who don't need repentance. He's not talking about people who transgress the law. He's talking about souls that have the courage to leave home and enter incarnation. And Christ is saying there is more joy in heaven for one soul who has that kind of courage to do that than for those who decide, I want to stay home with mommy and daddy. Now, as this bicycle wheel turns from the very, very top to the bottom, we go deeper and deeper and deeper into the illusion of being separate from God, of being separate from each other, and of being separate from nature. And when I look through history, what I see and what I see in my own experiences and my own kind of visionary experiences, that whenever a huge majority of the population gets lost in these illusions and they begin to create institutions, whether they're political institutions, financial institutions, religious institutions, or military institutions that solidify the sense of separation, God sends fully enlightened avatars in the flesh to awaken us back up. Whenever there's a majority of us that have sunk so low that we're at variance with everything and that we've kind of become members of institutions, and sometimes, as I said, they're political, sometimes they're financial, sometimes they're religious, sometimes they're military, but they all have this notion of solidifying the notion of separation from others and from nature. Whenever that happens to a significant majority, God sends down among us, fully enlightened avatars in the flesh to wake us back up. And you only have to trawl human history to find out the Buddha himself, or Jesus, or Mother Teresa, or people like Mahatma Gandhi, or Martin Luther King Jr., or Teresa of Avila. All of these extraordinary, fully realized avatars who try to awaken us to the reality of the journey we're on and to begin the upward cycle, the evolutionary aspect of this cycle. Which brings me to my final point. On this Mother's Day, I want to talk again about what I'm going to call the cycle of Christ and Christa consciousness. And I want to use Apollo 11 as a metaphor to illustrate what I'm going to say. Apollo 11 in July of 1969, this extraordinary human endeavor to land on the moon. And when you look at it, what are the stages of that process? The first one is that they had to kind of get into spacesuits, particular kinds of spacesuits. And then they got aboard a spacecraft that's going to take them to the moon. And then two of them are going to get into a landing module. And they're going to touch down on the moon. And they'll have a mission to try to explore this new terrain. And then they're going to get back into the kind of the landing craft and go back up to the orbiter and then come back down to planet Earth. And in that process, they're going to be debriefed. And even during the mission, they're being debriefed about every aspect of it. Now, I want to use that as a metaphor for the devolutionary and evolutionary journey that you and I have chosen to be on, the cycle of Christa and Christ consciousness. So what does incarnation consist of? Incarnation is putting on a spacesuit. It's getting into the clobber that we're going to need for the journey. It's we're committed to the journey by putting on the spacesuit. And then this is the soul committing to incarnation. And then the astronauts have to get onto the spacecraft itself. Now there's a physical body being fashioned in utero by the mother for that journey. And they're going to head and they're going to orbit the moon initially. And then two of them are going to get off into the landing module and touch down on the moon itself. And so in some senses, the baby exits the landing module. The landing module is mother's womb. And the baby exits the landing module and lands on planet Earth in the same way that those two astronauts exited the lunar capsule and came onto the moon itself. And so there's the kind of the stages as they evolve. And what then is the mission? For these, explorers on the moon, it was to get samples from what's there, to look around them, to make mental observations, and to explore this new world, this new moon world. And that's the job of each soul that incarnates and is born. There's the little infant exploring this new world, of ours. And the exploration goes in many, many stages. And you're going to just pick a few episodes from the life of Jesus to illustrate what that mission might look like. And the first one is the presentation in the temple. The mother and father bring this little neonate 8-day-old baby into the temple to be dedicated to the God of the Hebrews and the Israelites. So the child is being aligned with a particular wisdom tradition and a wisdom culture. That's the first stage after you land on the moon. Then the finding in the temple happened when he became a teenager. And now he's been invited, to go beyond mere ethnocentrism and to embrace all of the wisdom traditions of the entire planet, Earth, or the moon. So that's a growth. It's not abandoning the old one, it's transcending, which means to go beyond, but to include what has come before. And then there's, activating the mission. At age 30, Christ is now actively on the moon, with his mission. What does that mean? The final preparation, he goes on a retreat. He goes into the desert and he begins the hero's journey in prayer and fasting and temptation, leading to a baptism in the Jordan by John and a commissioning for his task. And now he's fully embracing the mission. And he lives in that, on that foreign terrain for 3 years. And then there's the departure, the death, the resurrection, and the ascension. And this is the completion of the Earth phase of the moon. It is the astronauts climbing aboard the landing module, going back to the orbiter, and coming back to planet Earth. And so for us, it means leaving the physical body, entering the etheric body, and journey on the way back to the soul body. And then the final piece of that is Pentecost. And Pentecost is the debriefing that goes on during and after the mission. As these guys are moving towards the moon, as they're on the moon, as they're coming back from the moon, and after they've arrived back, they're being debriefed about what the entire experience was. And we're doing that constantly. In the Hindu model again, you have Atman and Jiva. Atman is like ground control, Houston. And Jiva is like the guys in the spacecraft communicating with each other nonstop. That happens during every stage of this journey. And it happens, through prayer, through meditation, through visionary experiences, through deja vu, through intuition. It's happening nonstop. And so on this Mother's Day, what I'm saying is this, that I want to honor my own mother, Peg. I want to honor all of the mothers. I want to honor my grandmother and my great-grandmother whom I knew, that lineage. I want to honor all of the women out there today who are celebrating, birthing their own children. I see Hannah and Teresa right now. So we got a grandchild and a grandmother celebrating together. I want to honor all the mothers, the grandmothers, and the great-grandmothers of the planet. And I want to honor Mother Earth for what she's done for us for 4.6 billion years. And I want to honor Mother Cosmos for what she has done for us for 13.8 billion years. Because we live in a fractal in which mothering is the most important way in which evolution proceeds. Namaste.